come here on support and to fight on behalf of people, real people within this neighborhood. I see faces here that I've watched and seen over the last 50 years that I've been in this neighborhood, more than 50 years.
So
I grew up in this neighborhood,
So did I.
additions a little bit further up
So did I.
near Haight Street. But there's something that's happening as I walk through here, and I remember we have memory. There's always memory. I remember when this part, when none of this was here, the Black Student Union, which was, I remember, at San Francisco State, had their off-campus office around the corner, right here on the corner of the restaurant, with me and Sam Napier, who worked with the Panther Party, would sit down and have breakfast and talk about what was happening in the community here. There were real live discussions, not discussions about development in a building and creating new effigies, buildings and everything, but discussions about people's lives. What were we going to do in the midst of this massive redevelopment that was happening here? How were people, how were organizations like the Western Addition Community Organization fighting? I see faces, the same faces. We were out here in 1968. That's right. We were out here, some of us are right here, top of my man. We were out here in 1968. Yes. I got two of my friends out here in 1968 right here. And everything. So what are we going to do?
Right, come on, Mr. Glover.
The question is that we're standing out here almost in a situation where it's fait accompli. It has happened.
It's crazy.
It is doing. How do we fight? How do we not just talk about going down to City Hall and have members of City Hall fighting for this neighborhood, fighting for the diversity that this neighborhood represented? I grew up here.
Come on, Mr. Glover.
I come from Hunters Point all the way to the Stanford Hospital here, up on Stanford and up on Sacramento and Webster, where I was born. I was born there. Yeah. I come here with my dad, and I see this magic that was happening on the street down here. Magic when I went up there. I saw people who looked like me, people who had businesses, people who were doing work, people who were building community, people who were caring and fucking loving. That's what I saw here. And now it's here, look what we have here. We're gathered here under this one building, this building
still
right
fighting.
To talk about what is lost, what is lost, and how lives have been changed, and the gentrification continue to go on. What do we do about that?
Mr. Glover.
Right now. The building is here. The building ain't gonna go away. These buildings ain't gonna get away. How are we gonna fight for this? That's the question about it. How are we gonna fight for our own humanity right here in this particular moment in time and space right now? I had the opportunity, I guess I was the only one who had the opportunity to talk about reparations in front of the Congressional Committee around there, headed by many good-feeling, good-will people in Washington, D.C. And I had the opportunity to, our voices has to be loud and clear about that. How do we now resuscitate, build new leadership, and build the kind of community that San Francisco does not have anymore?
Come on, Mr. Glover.
My dad came here, left the Army after World War II. He wanted to go back to Kansas City because that's where he was from, the Midwest. My mama from the Deep South. They had married in New York. They got out here. And my dad said, come on, Carrie, I'm going back to Detroit. I got a job waiting for me in Detroit. Imagine what that job was. And my mother said, we're not going anywhere. We better stay here. We're going to stay here. This is God's country. My mother thought this was God's country. She grew and she made us feel that this was God's country. And the possibility, we have to recreate, reimagine the possibility for all of us, whether we're black, we're Hispanic, whether we're Asian, whether we're working class white. We have to rebuild this place for that. And that's what it had. That's not what it has been. They have not delivered on the promise that was delivered, that was destined to be delivered in this. And that's what we have to fight for. Thank you so much. My mother and father married in New York in the end of 1943. My dad was in the service in the Army. He was restationed in Los Angeles right after their marriage. My mother came out here. My mother's from rural Georgia. My dad from Kansas City, Missouri. And then just toward the end of the war, he was stationed here. So my dad says to my mother at the end of the war, after the discharge, he says, come on, Carrie, that's my mother's name. Carrie, we're going back to Detroit. I got a job waiting for me in Detroit. My mother said, you better find a job here. We're not going anywhere. This is God's country. I grew up in here. I walked these streets. I walked these streets as a child. I walked these streets as a student during the first stages of redevelopment. I was at those Waco meetings, Western Addition Community Organization, before they was in the air, as a student, as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old student, listening. I worked in the tutorial program. At Third Baptist, I worked in the tutorial program, which San Francisco State, because it was a teacher's college, it had tutorial programs in this community. I worked and walked these streets. I went to houses of community members at that time, and we listened to this. The one thing about it is these, I think, didn't make us extraordinary. I think it was happening all over the country, in other places as well. The students were saying, here, this is the community I come from. I come from the Mission Latinx community. I come from the Western Addition. I come from the Hunters Point. Those things were happening right here. And I have a responsibility to that community. I've never left. I still live a little bit further up, a few blocks where I grew up as a child. But I'm still in San Francisco because I think that it's important to fight for working people. I think it's important to fight for justice here in San Francisco.
But the significance of this building itself is what exactly?
That's why you have the people out here. That's significance. I don't need to tell you the significance of it.
For you though, why do you think?
Well, I come up here because I know this community. I live in this community. I don't live in LA. I don't live in New York. I lived in this community and I continue to live. So that's why I'm here.
And what would you like to see? And what would you like to ultimately see happen with this building?
Well, I can't determine what that decision is. I think that decision has to be made by citizens who feel that they have value and their needs and their needs and aspirations have value, and that's what this rally is about. I'm not going to be here. I'm out here because nobody talks about reparations. I'm probably one of the few major people in my profession who talk about reparations, and we talk about other things about community because I come out of community.
Would you like to see this as a reparation?
Well, I'm not here to make that decision. The community has the basis. We can have them meet, and we can have them begin to coalesce to talk to them. I'm just here as a part of the community. You know, they're here. Their voices out here, and more of them who are here or not here. I walk around here. They've got people that I've seen here around here for 50, 60 years.
I guess we'll just see what happens. I guess we'll just see what happens.
Well, we'll see what happens. You know, I think, but certainly, I'm on their side. If what you say, whose side are you on? I'm on their side. And if it means something, and if it brings some real dialogue, not adjustments, but some real dialogue, and some real reparative justice there, then we won.
Thank you, sir.
I worked for this city. I worked 6.5 years of my life in this city, in city government. So I have something to say. In Hunters Point, in the Mission, I worked in this community. I ran a tutorial program out of Third Baptist Church when I was 20 years old. I'm 75 years old. Okay, thank you. But that's the truth. So I'm not just an autograph. I'm not just an autograph. I'm sorry.
You talked about how the Fillmore was so special to you, and you spent some time here with your dad.
I love my dad. My dad come down here. He had a friend at a little bar down sub-basement bar right on Steiner and before we saw the post office and everything else on Steiner and Geary there. We used to come there. They would take me up to the Kaiser Hospital. We walked down here together, and it was marvelous. It was incredible. I had never seen anything like it, you know, as a 7, 8-year-old kid. And that's what he did. And he had a great friend. We sit down there, and he had a little bar down here. That was a community. He showed me where Billie Holiday used to stay. He showed me where they had the places for musicians who were brass players, horn players, and everything else. He showed me that. came of age in this thing. You know.
How important is this building to the black community?
Well, I remember 1300, the restaurant. I remember coming here when it first opened. I remember trying to keep it alive. There's a number of people in the community trying to keep it alive. So I think this, if this becomes the last vestige of what this was, then it's important. But it's important for these people in a lot of ways. Ma'am, I'm sorry. You interview me. I just want to, please, let me get this in. I appreciate that.
The Gumbo Band.